Hey, welcome YouTubers. I'm an old school Aussie DM and just wanted to make a clip to show how things were, how things are now, the differences between the past and the present, whether they're good or bad. One thing we did differently in the past, as players, we would roll more than one character. Sometimes there would be a single person handling 3 or 4 characters. Sure, you could use NPCs or retainers to fill out your party, but sometimes most people would just roll up 2 or 3 characters. Anyway, this was of course to cushion the blow against character deaths. While no one wants to see a TPK or a total party kill, it was pretty commonplace to lose 1 or 2 people along the way. So you would have maybe a second or third character that you could just press on with the adventure. Now, these days, of course, in 5e, people are far more invested in the character that they roll up. They've gone to the trouble of creating a backstory, traits, faults, character faults, a history, and so they become more invested, and sometimes they'll even go to the trouble of dressing up, inhabiting the character visually as well as emotionally, and so in the event of player death, naturally it can become a little bit more traumatic. So they're the main difference. That's the main difference between the past and the present. We don't want to lose our players as DMs as much because it can be just simply a bigger, more involved ordeal to roll up a new character and to dream up a new story to go with the character. Now, just a couple of generalised tips. Also, when it comes to play, I don't like to show the hit points of monsters. I prefer just to give perhaps a visual description of whether they're bloodied or hurt. Also, I tend to hide monster initiative, so during combat, players aren't quite sure when the monsters are going to get their go. A common mistake I see campaigns and people making is players will say they're going to ready an action, but this is really a combat mechanic, and you can't really do this until combat has started off with the initiative roll. You can then ready an action in response, but oftentimes I see people saying, oh, before I kick down the door, I'll ready a fireball to shoot off as soon as the door's open. Well, initiative hasn't been rolled yet. You just can't do that straight away. And that sort of segues into the issue of surprise. I've seen a lot of people doing surprise incorrectly. Don't worry about surprise until initiative has been rolled. If before combat a party or one side has achieved surprise against another side, then you simply go ahead and roll initiative, and if one side has been quiet or has hidden in the bushes or waited to achieve an ambush or something, then we can do a perception check for all the people on the other side to see if some, all, 1 or 2 of them are actually surprised, and if they are surprised, then of course they don't take part in the first round of combat. So surprise is very simple. It should be very simple. You see that film Predator, where surprise is often destroyed because someone crunches a leaf or a twig. There's a famous scene where one Green Beret turns to Carl Weathers and says, "You're ghosting me, mother father. You do that again, I'm going to blow your brains out." So in other words, if you've got one lounge party member in clunky heavy plate mail armour who keeps ruining surprise, then you should probably get them to drop back so they don't keep ghosting the party with destroying surprise, okay? Everyone needs to be sneaky, or just send the thief ahead, okay? If you want surprise, then think about it, okay? Now the other thing is, don't forewarn players if they're getting too ambitious and they want to do something crazy. Let them just go ahead. Let them say, oh, I'm going to attempt to teleport through a wall. If they don't have Misty Step or teleport, then simply describe to them, okay, you spend your turn running into a wall and flattening your face. Okay, like there's no need to metagame and explain rules to people. If someone wants to do something very ambitious, it's good to allow them and do an athletics check or a dex check. But if it's way too crazy, like you want to go and grapple a giant or something, then just describe them hugging their ankles as they're trying to throw them over. Now people might say, well, that doesn't accord with the grapple rules. Well, have you ever read the encumbrance rules? You could apply that rule. If someone, Crawford and people in D&D would say the rules aren't all inclusive. Someone wants to do something that defies common sense, even if it's not in the rules, you apply a common sense judgment and override the rules, okay? The rules are not all encompassing, and they cannot cover every eventuality and every permutation of people's actions. So if they tried, they would be far too complicated and far too cumbersome for people to read through. So if someone wants to attempt to go and push a giant off the cliff or whatever, then describe what happens. And if later on it results in a fatality and they want to know the ruling, or you want to, they want to see what they could have done differently because their character died, well then you can go and say, my adjudication was based on page 136 plus 159, whatever. So if they really need a justification in the rules, you can give it to them. There was that great Netflix series I saw recently called Cursed, Catherine Langford. Anyway, Merlin at the start is attempting to cast these spells, but he's lost his magic. So he keeps yelling out arcane incantations, but nothing's happening. Simply go ahead and describe that. That's what happens if someone attempts to cast a spell that they don't know. You say, oh, well, nothing happens. Or suppose there's an anti-magic effect over the area, nothing happens. You don't need to tell them why. Don't get bogged down in explaining rules. Let the combat and choice of actions become streamlined and free-flowing, and keep it all moving. Don't ever get bogged down in rules. If someone wants to question, oh, well, that's not impact, then just say, right, this is what happens. I'll explain to you afterwards at the end of the session why I made the ruling if you want to, but we're going to move on from here. So just be polite. But obviously you also need to know when to shut up and let players discuss things, and you've got to encourage player banter. And one of the best people that does that is Chris Perkins. Chris Perkins, he's very eloquent, describes scenes very well. He's a little loose with the rules, but he does so in favour of rich storytelling, and he's very, very creative and innovative. If you just see, sometimes he'll just shut up and smile at the players and wait for them to say what they're going to do, and he puts the onus on them to speak, which is very good, and he tries to share that around, dragging in the quieter players so that they become more involved. You can't favour one player over another, even though sometimes someone has to speak for the group. You've got to try and get everyone in. Everyone has to bond and become good friends. This is not let's all gather around the fire and listen to one wonderful story being read by a dungeon master as we go through flavour text and just move like verbal diarrhea. You don't want to do that. Dungeons and Dragons has to be enjoyable for the players. They have to feel involved and invested. So Chris Perkins, go and watch that guy if you know, if you want to learn from the best. Chris Perkins. Don't worry about looking at really polished people like Matthew Mercer, or you could become daunted at his skills. And just don't worry about trying to measure up to that sort of standard just yet. Look at people like the Web DM and these people who sort of understand the rules well, and they keep combat flowing and everything's smooth, everything's running like seamlessly. Another good player, another good channel is that WasD20 guy. He is very calm. I'd love to have and another guy would be Noah Antwiler. I don't know if he's still active, but that guy really knew his stuff. Now, I just want to get on one more topic, resting. Resting shouldn't be boring. When people say, I want to get a long rest, or I want to get a short rest, or whatever, this is a time for things to happen. This is an opportunity. Don't waste it and say, oh, we're all 8 hours later, you get your hit dice back and here, heal this much. Okay, the first thing, What about those iron rations you had at the start of the go? You don't want to play a campaign for 10 years and look down at your sheet and see that you've still got your 1 week's worth of iron rations. Bit silly, really. Why don't you mark off, okay, how I'm getting my food? Maybe you could look at the cooking kits or the cooking skills, because don't forget, there are these like extra feat-related abilities and toolkits that you can use. If you've got a good cook, you might recover 1 hit dice plus 1 hit point instead of just 1 hit dice. You can get an extra bonus, or you might want to spend that resting time, say, attuning to magic items. Never just tell people, oh, this is a potion of healing, this is a staff of holy whatever. This is a potion. They've got to identify this is a wand. Not only might they might have identified, they might have to attune to it as well. So also the shelter. Is it raining? Is that gonna? Have you got a carpenter? Can they build a tent? Ever seen the series Survivor? Bring all that stuff into your campaign when it comes to things like resting. Is some idiot going to attempt to sleep in his plate mail? I was reading Xanta's Guide to Everything, and it very cleverly says they only gain a quarter of their hit dice if they're going to be dumb enough to sleep in their armour. And of course, if they take their armour off and they get a random monster encounter, guess what happens? They might be armour class 10 with no dexterity bonus because it takes them an hour to put their armour on. They might be able to grab a shield or something with +2. So anyway, it's time for me to go and have a bit of a rest too, but just before I go, I was going to mention a website, Roll20, very good, and if I bother doing another clip, I'm going to talk about how I'm creating my VTT or virtual tabletop. Got an old busted up glass table and TV. I'm going to screw them in so that I can use Roll20, which is the best website, obviate the need for miniatures and maps and grids and things. You can just whack it straight out with your Google Chrome plugged into the back of the TV under a glass table, or you could even use a projector. But I'm going to work on that, and I'll do another clip to show how that turned out. Bye.